Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now, 865-243-TALK. That's 243-8255. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
You are tuned in to The Remedy for the usual boring radio show. You know that radio show, the one you listen to, but it just seems to drag on and on. This isn't that show. This is one of the fastest growing shows on one of the fastest growing radio networks on the air, the Patrick Riggins Show, here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. Each week we are here, as radio announcer shines as at the beginning of the show, fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Each week we bring to you ever more reasons to continue to work to turn this country around and get it headed back towards good old American principles. Helping us get the message out is this radio station to which you are now tuned, 100.3 WNOX, the station blasting out 100,000 watts of broadcast power, reaching all of the Southeast, more specifically parts of 5 great states here in the southeastern United States. If you want to take your listening to the next level, that of sight, you can do that. Just bring up your web browser on that there internet. Type in the address of this radio station's website, which would be www.wnoxfm.com. And when it comes up, you can sit back and enjoy watching all the behind-the-scenes antics that occur here in the studio. Or sometimes you'll see lack of antics if Tori happened to stay out late that night before.
You can watch us on the internet.
Speaking of which, if you're watching on the webcam, you'll see Tori to my left.
I was good last night. Stayed home.
He was, so you're bright and bushy-tailed today?
Yeah, stayed home and played radio.
Yeah. Yes, you want to tell them what you're doing real quick again there?
Oh, well, thank you. I get a plug.
Get a little plug in?
Yeah, started my own internet radio station, Pirate Radio 13. You can go there and listen to us when you're not listening to this great station.
Oh, of course.
And this great show. It's pirateradio13.com. All you have to do is put that into your search engine and it pulls up the webpage and plays the music automatically. So it's a little bit of everything.
And you can hear Tori all through the week.
Yeah.
Or what he listens to.
Yeah, and it's unedited,
censored,
uncensored. So
edited, yeah.
If you got any little children, you might want to watch it. But other than that,
monitor what they're listening to, what you should be doing anyway.
Yeah, when you're not listening to this station.
Well, I mean, the parents should be doing that, monitoring what your kids listen to. They don't, but
yes,
you know,
I'll try to. But that's pirateradio13.com. Thank you.
That's Tori's plug for the day.
I'm happy now.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in again this week. You're listening to one of the fastest growing radio shows on the dial. It's the biggest and most relevant show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, if I must say so myself. In this real quick short segment, I wanted to touch on the story about this thing that came up this week, Mitch McConnell's office being bugged and all this, and just in general, all this character assassination going on in Washington. Now, you may ask yourself why this is all happening, and it's really very simple. It's because of money. There is too much money and thus power concentrated in Washington, D.C. to be healthy. That's why everyone there is so neurotic. They have no choice. They have such a lust for this power that it corrupts all their principles. Those who had them to begin with, that is. If we didn't have all this money and power concentrated in such a small area, such a small group of people, if this temptation wasn't there, then there wouldn't be so many problems in government, because there would not be any incentive for it. There would be not so much to gain. I don't know if you realize, if you really think about it, there are millions and millions of dollars being doled out to companies and individuals from Washington. There is so much on the line that nothing is over the line. Nothing is going too far, considering the enormous amounts of money available to the right people. Good grief, our budget is over $3.5 trillion. It came out $3.8 trillion. Do you understand how much money that is? And you wonder why there are so many problems in Washington, D.C. Can you imagine how many fewer problems we would have if those amounts of money weren't available? This is why I say there's no difference between the two parties in Washington. Democrat, Republican, both of them spend this money on their friends, their constituents, their campaign donors. All of these people are having a huge party, and we, the taxpayers, are the ones paying for it. And when the dollar collapses, who do you think is going to get hurt? It's the working class of people here. That's who. They're the ones who are going to suffer the most. How many politicians do you think are in that working class? Maybe none? Maybe a couple, 3 or 4, not many. So they don't give a flip if the economy tanks. They have theirs. With all this money floating around, it is too much of a temptation to not try and get their hands on it. These people would do anything to do that. This is what is leading to a breakdown of the system. The founders never intended the government to have this kind of sway in America. They never intended for all this money to be spent by government because they knew it would start to concentrate power in Washington and governments around the country, local and state. This is a bad thing. Just look around and see for yourselves how much corruption, all the waste in government. With a diminished government, you don't have to worry about it much because the money just isn't there. The temptation isn't present because the money isn't present. All right, we're up on the first break here on the Patrick Riggin Show. We have a packed show this week. I hope you still think nice of me after this show's over this week, because we'll probably offend some people, but we probably do that every week anyway.
There you go.
And it's probably good. If I'm offending you, it's because you need to think about things.
Maybe you need to be offended.
Maybe you do need to be offended. Get you thinking.
Never been offended a day in my life.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah. I'll come in here and not shower one week. That'll offend
I've been mad plenty of times. I'm never offended.
All right. When we come back, we'll get started here on the Patrick Riggin Show, and we'll kick it off with the President's weekly address.
But I'm still caged inside.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggin Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome back to the Patrick Riggin Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. If you like that song, you can catch that on Pirate Radio 13.
Love the song.
That's where I heard that song. So,
thank you.
You know, I never noticed that. We sit in here and I watched a car driving through the parking lot. I won't mention the lawyer's name, but I didn't know lawyers had wraps on SUVs.
He does.
Apparently he does.
He's got it on SUVs and buses.
I've seen it on the buses, but I've never seen it on an SUV.
Y'all know who we're talking about if you've seen it on the bus. But yeah, there's an SUV just drove by.
Got the whole, looks like the bus advertisement.
He's got a big budget for advertising.
He must. I guess he's making some money there.
So, you had something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. This week, the president, well, I'll just say what he did. He sank to a new low. He was using the parents of one of the children killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School to push his liberal gun control agenda.
No.
And what I find astonishing, well, I guess in today's society I shouldn't, but what I find astonishing is the willingness of these two people, and for that matter, everyone else who came down from Sandy Hook to Washington to badger the Senate over this bill. All of these people are willing to be used by the president, the media, all these liberals, used by all of them to take the rights of Americans away. Yes, that's you, Francine Wheeler. That's a name to remember. She's a traitor who is willing to use a tragedy in her own life to push an agenda aimed directly at limiting the rights of Americans. I'll just go ahead and say, I'm calling you a traitor, Francine Wheeler. The woman who gave the president's weekly address this week, all of your crying, all your tears, while they may appeal to emotional people, they don't appeal to me. You, Mrs. Wheeler, you are trying to take away the rights of Americans. Rights guaranteed to us under the Constitution of the United States. Look, I'm sorry your child was murdered, but it wasn't my fault. It wasn't any gun manufacturer's fault. It was the fault of the crazy, screwed up person doing it. Now, if you think I'm going to stand by and allow you to exploit this tragedy to take away my rights, you're extremely mistaken. You and all those other people bust down to Washington to lobby the Senate to pass this gun control bill. Every one of you is a traitor to this country. I'm sorry if that offends any of you people who lost a loved one in that shooting, but I deal in reality. And the reality is you are threatening my rights, Mrs. Wheeler. You are directly working to take away more of my freedom and liberty, and I'm not going to stand by and allow you to do it. Not without a fight. You can appear on television all you want, crying, pleading. But as for me, your pleas fall on deaf ears. You lost all sympathy from me, and that goes for all these other people who exploit these tragedies in Colorado and Sandy Hook, wherever. Just because you suffer a loss doesn't mean I have to lose some of my freedom. It doesn't work that way. If you start trying to take away my freedom, or even a small part of it, you are now my enemy and deserving of none of my sympathy. None. Here's a clip from her address yesterday.
We have to convince the Senate to come together and pass common sense gun responsibility reforms that will make our communities safer.
Common sense reforms. Just like the president said. Although she and her husband claimed to have written this address she gave. Funny how it sounds just like the president's speech in Denver.
I put forward a series of common sense proposals. That's just common sense. The opponents of some of these common sense laws.
You know, if all this is so common sense, then why in the world is it such a hard sell? Because it isn't common sense. That's why. More and more people are starting to wake up and realize that. If everyone was demanding this, it would be done already. Here's that clip again from Mrs. Wheeler from yesterday.
We have to convince the Senate to come together and pass common sense gun responsibility reforms that will make our communities safer.
What I also wanted to say about this clip, that's why I played it for you again. What I wanted to say is this, and it's been said over and over, none, N-O-N-E, none of what is being proposed would have stopped Sandy Hook from happening. Nothing. Because you know that, it immediately tells me you aren't working to prevent another tragedy like Sandy Hook. If you were, you would be proposing legislation and badgering the Senate about this that would directly address what happened. But you aren't. You are pushing to restrict the rights of American citizens. You are no better than any other enemy working against the United States, working against the citizens of this country. Again, Francine Wheeler, either you know what you're doing, thus you are exploiting a shooting, the murder of your son, or you don't know what you're doing, and thus are being used as a pawn in a much bigger game that you clearly don't understand. Either way, you do know you are trying to restrict the rights of American citizens. I firmly believe you know that much anyway, and yet you continue to lobby for that very thing. Let me put it this way, Mrs. Wheeler. I keep using her name so you'll know who I'm talking about. And if she happens across this radio show or a recording of it, there'll be no mistaking I'm directly addressing her. Mrs. Wheeler, Mrs. Francine Wheeler, your child died in a tragic shooting at a school. But that gives you no right, none whatsoever, to try and take away the rights that have been secured for me by veterans of our military, people who have died for my freedom, died to pull this country away from Great Britain. died in ways much more horrific than your son did. Sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, aunts, uncles, moms, dads, all have paid the price for our freedom, my freedom. Hundreds of thousands, or depending on how you want to count it, up to millions of people have died to win and protect my freedoms, my liberties. And we are supposed to throw it all away over the shooting of your son. The gall, the audacity you must have to ask such a thing. You might as well go and spit on the graves of the veterans when you ask, let me rephrase that, when you demand that I give up freedoms that have been bought and paid for us in blood, a lot of which was spilled in foreign countries, fighting wars that we shouldn't have been engaged in the first place. But just because your son was killed here in America at a school, I should have to give up some of those precious freedoms. How dare you make such a demand, Mrs. Wheeler, and the rest of you people using these types of tragedies to promote your liberal agenda? How dare any of you demand I give back freedoms, liberties, rights, these things that have been fought for and paid with the blood of people going before us. People who thought our Constitution, our freedom was worth fighting for. People who thought it better to serve and die in battle than to live under oppression, live without the fresh air of freedom and liberty this country offers. I tell you, people like you literally make me sick, Mrs. Wheeler. You sell out your country, your fellow citizens at the drop of a hat. So what, your son died? Many, many more moms and dads lost their children fighting to protect the very freedoms you wish to fritter away. All because your son was killed. Tell you what, Mrs. Wheeler, go tell those mothers and fathers whose children have given their lives for this country, to protect this country. Tell them their children's deaths have no meaning. Because what they fought for, what their children gave their lives for, you want to give away to Washington, to the government. And not only Francine Wheeler, but as I said at the start of the segment, all those people who ran down to Washington trying to badger the Senate into passing this bill. All of you are traitors. All of you make me equally sick to think about it. There you are in Washington, D.C., a city jam-packed with memorials to our soldiers who have fought for the very freedom you are trying to restrict. Did you people go to some nice tours while you were down there in Washington? In between cozying up to the president, trying to get your 15 minutes of fame? Did you bother to go and take the time to go spit on the names of the soldiers who died for this country, this Constitution, our freedom, your freedom? Did you bother to go and laugh at the tomb of the unknown soldier? Laugh and point out how stupid he was to die for this country when we have people like you trying to sell it out? Sure, your children got killed, but many more children have died defending this country. And I'll honor and respect them 100 times more. No, wait, 1,000,000 times more than I will ever respect any of you. In fact, I respect your children who died at Sandy Hook more than I respect you, because you are exploiting them, while they weren't old enough to exploit anyone. Probably didn't care to either. No, I hope the Senate doesn't pass this stupid unconstitutional bill. And if they do, if they don't have the balls to tell you traitors no, then I pray the House will stand for the American people and reject this blatant grab at the rights of us, the American citizens. We are up on the half-hour break of the Patrick Riggins Show. And that's the way it is. When I come back, we'll have Macho Man Randy Savage in here. No, that wasn't him. That was Pretty Boy.
Ric Flair.
Ric Flair, that's it. Ric Flair. When we come back,
walk that out.
I'll take a little break, have a drink of water, calm down, and we'll be back with a couple more things in the second part of the Patrick Riggins Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Ain't no woman like the one I got. Tori doing a little dancing around the studio.
I'm feeling the soul.
That's the 4 tops, not the 5 tops.
Or the 3.
Not the 3 tops.
Or the Box Tops.
Or the
which
Box
is a
Tops.
totally different band altogether.
Yeah, that is a band, though. I've heard.
Yes,
Yeah,
the Box Tops.
All right. Back from that last segment, relaxed and a little calmer now. I have a story here, kind of along the same lines of that, though. I don't know if you guys have caught this. I think it's been making the rounds on the internet. It ran on local news in Jacksonville, Florida this weekend. And the news website, it ran on the news website for the local station there, which is WOKV, and the website being WOKV.com, of course. Instead of trying to read ahead and hit the high points in this article, I'll just read it straight through quickly here for you. But it's very interesting, and it kind of falls on that last segment and from the show last week. The column starts out, Aaron Harvey's son is in 4th grade in Duval County. Is that Duval? I think it's Duval, isn't it? Duval County, Florida. Everyone who knows is screaming at the radio, "You idiot!" Looking through his son's backpack a couple of weeks ago, he ran across a note that his son had left in there in his backpack from an assignment in school at the end of last year. Now, a note stated, and quote, this is what the note said, is written by his son. His son's in 4th grade, and it was written kind of, I guess, crayon or colored pencil, so he could recognize his writing, the son's writing. But the note stated, quote, I am willing to give up some of my constitutional rights in order to be safer and more secure, unquote. The statement was signed and written and signed by his son. Mr. Harvey had obtained the guide for that particular lesson, which was apparently aimed to, quote, create an awareness of the 5 rights contained in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and help students determine their opinions on which rights they value most and least. The lesson included a visiting constitutional lawyer, which the district says is a partnership used specifically for these civics-based lessons. The lesson itself, though, isn't in question, but rather what Mr. Harvey says the teacher did after. He says the teacher selected several students out of the class to write that statement and sign it. Again, that statement was, I am willing to give up some of my constitutional rights in order to be safer and more secure. And it's the same story. He has some other parents, apparently, and it's the same story he's heard from them who had children in the class. The school, Cedar Hills Elementary School, declined to comment, as did the school board member representing the school. Well, no, duh. Mr. Harvey reached out to the Duval County School District, which told him the lesson specifically is designed to develop critical thinking skills. In a statement issued to WOKV, the school district says, our possible concern rests with the follow-up activity that may have been conducted after the lesson. They are now investigating the, quote, facts of the assignment. Oh, isn't that nice? The school district has a, quote, possible concern with the follow-up activity. You know, the propagandizing of the students that they don't need all those pesky and inconvenient rights the Constitution gives them. His dad, again, Mr. Harvey, says the district claims his son did the activity on his own free will without any prompting from the teacher. Oh, sure he did. Personally, I'm a guy, but I was small at the time, and I know the concern for 4th graders or their constitutional rights and which ones they think they don't need or are willing to give up to be more safe. No, they're not worried about whether Mom remembered to put snack pack pudding in their lunch. It's which constitutional rights do they want to keep and which ones would they like to give up to feel safer. And by the way, which ones could that be anyway? You know, is it speech? Are they supposed to give up freedom of speech in order to feel safer? No, that can't be it. Maybe freedom of religion? Could that be it? No, I don't think giving that up would make you feel any safer, unless maybe you're in a Muslim country and you're a Christian. The interesting part of all this is the original class assignment specifies the rights contained within the First Amendment, and those are the rights of the ones being discussed. For those of you who might have slipped your mind which rights those are in the First Amendment, it's freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom to petition the government, and freedom of assembly. None of those could be given up to make you feel safer. So clearly the teacher means the Second Amendment and was swaying the students in that direction as well. Now, Mr. Harvey, again, that's the boy's father. Mr. Harvey says there is a meeting planned for next week where he plans to learn more about the intended assignment and the logic behind the follow-up activity. I don't think you're going to find logic in that follow-up activity, but hey, I mean, it's a free country. Look all you want. He says he doesn't want to see any punishment on the teacher, but rather an agreement that an activity like this wouldn't happen in the future. You know, that's just peachy. Leave the teacher in the classroom to further propagandize future generations. Sure, that's the answer. You know, I was with his dad up to this point, but this just demonstrates he has no backbone. Yeah, I can guarantee if the situation was reversed, if a student came home with a note stating they believe the Second Amendment is the most important because it secures all the others, all kinds of hell would be breaking loose. All the liberals would be screaming for this teacher's head, and he would be run out of his job. No, Mr. Harvey, if this is the kind of education your son is getting, you should be calling for this teacher's resignation or outright dismissal. Because by losing your will and backbone, you are condemning future children to this same sort of liberal brainwashing. This is exactly why I stated on my show just last week, get your children out of these government schools. You don't want them there. Do whatever you have to do. Get them out right now. They aren't learning anything. Their academic achievements are virtually non-existent when measured against students from around the world. Certainly not on par with where they should be, seeing how we're the world's leading country, or we used to be. Now, China's kind of coming up. If you missed that show last week and you want to know how to listen to it, just jump over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. And it's all together, Patrick Riggins, R-I-G-G-I-N-S Show. And you can listen to that show where I covered some of the problems that they're having in government schools. And it's nothing that'll surprise you. Along with all the other shows we have archived there. But this kind of stuff right here is why you shouldn't allow the government to educate your children. They aren't going to get an academic education. All they're going to get is this government is great propaganda. And when you leave your children in there, what you're saying is you agree with what they're being taught. It's just like when you don't vote. If you say, well, I don't want to vote because, you know, it doesn't make any difference in how these elections turn out. Well, when you say that and you don't vote, politicians see that. And they see voter turnout. And when people aren't turning out to vote, even if you're voting third party, what they see is people don't care and I can get away with what I want to get away with. And that's exactly what these schools see when you don't go down there and scream and yell and demand people get fired for teaching your kids, or not teaching your kids in some cases, the things they need to know and stop propagandizing them. Anyway, we're up on the last break here on the Patrick Riggins Show. When we come back, we'll look at this universal background checks stuff real quick, and we have a couple other little things we'll try to get to in that last segment. And let's see. Yeah, we'll definitely get to universal background checks. We'll start off with that one. Here on the Patrick Riggins Show, residing on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
And we're back here on the Patrick Riggins Show. Starting off with a little Tool on the bumper music. President Obama has been touting his universal background checks, which ties in with the rest of this show today, as one of the key ways to eliminate gun violence. Even his stooges from Sandy Hook, those traitors trying to lobby Congress, they believe in them. But they are wrong, as evidenced by a column in Reason magazine this month. Now, this column was written by Jacob Solomon and starts out, to make sure those who would commit acts of violence cannot get access to guns, President Obama said in January Congress should mandate background checks not just for sales by federally licensed firearms dealers, as the current law requires, but for all gun transfers except those between relatives. This idea seems to be the most popular of Obama's gun control proposals, backed by 92% of respondents in a mid-January CBS News poll. Yet, universal background checks are unlikely to stop mass shootings, and enforcing them would require the sort of surveillance that has long been anathema to defenders of the Second Amendment, exposing millions of peaceful people to the threat of gun confiscation and criminal prosecution. Although an expanded background check requirement is ostensibly a response to the December 14th massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, it would not have stopped the gunman in that attack, exactly, who used his mother's firearms. Even if he had tried to buy guns, it seems he would have passed a background check because he did not have a disqualifying criminal or psychiatric record. That is typically the case in mass shootings, observes Northeastern University criminologist James Allen Fox. And if they could not pass a background check, Fox says, mass killers could always find an alternative way of securing the needed weaponry, even if they had to steal from family members or friends. No. Meanwhile, to make sure that every gun buyer undergoes a background check, the government would need to know where all the guns are. Although Obama did not mention that little detail, the Washington Post reported that the administration was seriously considering creating a system that would track the movement and sale of weapons through a national database. Second Amendment supporters historically have opposed gun registration, fearing it could lead to confiscation, which has happened in places such as Canada, Great Britain, Australia, California, and New York City. While wholesale disarmament would be clearly unconstitutional in this country, confiscation of guns that legislators arbitrarily deem unnecessary or excessively dangerous is easier to imagine, especially given Obama's support for new, stricter ban on assault weapons. If fear of confiscation seems paranoid to you, consider what would happen if the federal government, merely enforcing existing law through expanded background checks and improved records, another step nearly everyone seems to think is self-evidently sensible, such a crackdown would reveal the folly of current restrictions, which would prohibit gun ownership by several absurdly broad categories of people under the threat of a 5-year prison term. One disqualifier is a felony record, whether or not the offense involved violence or even a victim. It is doubtful that check kiters, pot growers, or unauthorized farm workers, another banned category, are more likely to go on a shooting rampage than the average person. Federal law also bars, quote, an unlawful user of any controlled substance from owning a gun. In the column, he says, think about that for a moment. If you smoke pot or use a relative's Vicodin or Xanax, you have no right to keep and bear arms. Survey data indicate that nearly 40 million Americans have used illicit drugs in the last year. And the true number is probably higher, since people may be reluctant to admit illegal behavior. One of Obama's common sense steps, and he says that quite a bit, to reduce gun violence is better sharing of data by federal agencies. including lists of employees or job applicants who have failed drug tests. So just applying for a job and failing the drug test, now you're in somebody's database. Seeking such information from state agencies and private employers seems equally logical. This is one of those situations where, quote, better could be worse. Although better enforcement of existing restrictions on gun ownership seem unobjectionable, it would unjustly deny millions of people the right to armed self-defense. A follow-up to this article is the appearance of Senator Ted Cruz on Sean Hannity's show on April 10th, where Senator Cruz stated, "We should be focusing on violent criminals, and that has not been Obama Justice Department's priority. In 2010, there were over 15,000 felons and fugitives who tried illegally to purchase firearms. Of those 15,000, the Obama Justice Department prosecuted just 44. Now, the fact checkers over at Washington Post found that the senator did get one of those sets of numbers wrong. In 2010, the number of felons and fugitives denied a firearm was actually 48,000, not 15,000. But the number of prosecutions he cited, 44, was right on the nose. That's out of nearly 73,000 total denials for a variety of reasons by the FBI. Of course, they ran to get the numbers of the Bush administration on to find that they had done marginally more, but still about the same percentage-wise. Of course, that doesn't make Obama's behavior any more acceptable. It's funny how liberals do this. Bush did it, so you can't say anything. Like if Obama's taking away our rights and Bush did as well, then all of a sudden it's okay. So just a little something when they're yelling about those background checks.
Bush did it first.
Bush did it, so we can do it
first.
Yeah. Real quick, too, I want to hit this before we end the show. Hours after Republican colleagues in the House called for President Obama to crack down on legal marijuana in Colorado and Washington, Representative Dan Rohrabacher in California, he's a Republican, introduced H.R. 1523, a bill that would immunize from federal prosecution individual marijuana consumers as well as medical and non-medical marijuana businesses operating in states in which they are legal. I wanted to get that in real quick. That is a little federal statute they're trying to get through, that if your state says it's okay, the feds can't come in and tell you it's not. And that's the way it should be.
They pretty much knew about that going in, I think, though, too. So that was...
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Because the feds was going to say that they were going to do something, but really, state level, I believe the state...
Well, because the feds, they own us all. States are just administrative. They look at them just as administrative people for federal law. Anyway, we're up on the last of the Patrick Riggins Show. It's been a full action-packed show. If you want more information about us, you can go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. That's Riggins. That's how you spell Riggins, not Patrick. Patrick Riggins Show. And be sure and hit that like button. Really? Yeah, exactly. You can also go to youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. And you can drop us a card or letter if you want via U.S. mail here at WNOX on Kingston Pike. Oh, if you want to email us, same thing, patrickriggins@gmail.com. Pretty simple. Get hold of us. Anyway, join me next Sunday afternoon where once again, hey, we'll talk about freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. This is Patrick Riggins, and we'll see you next Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Have a fantastic week.
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggins Show. Every Sunday from 2 to 3 p.m. Be there.